historical Marxism, which was the Marxism of the Second International and then partly of the beginning of with the Russian Revolution, turned to be a Marxism also of Asia, Africa, and one should add, and Latin America. Now, that is a second enormous difference between the first and the second long run. Therefore, we are moving into a period that the only possible qualification is, let us say, chaos. Wars and revolutions, these are good words, but chaos at least. Which means that we cannot know, the false question is, what will be the world after the crisis? Nobody can know it. The false question asked often by good journalist even, can we avoid chaos? Certainly not. The system has produced, has led to that chaos. We cannot avoid it. The only question is, что делать? What we should do in that situation. If the analysis is roughly correct, but needs much more concrete analysis of all the facets of the contradictions of that system, what should we do? And the left here, the radical left, is facing with a gigantic opportunity. The radical left cannot exist for long times in history without being quickly victorious and creating new problems. That is, the radical left cannot put itself into a refrigerator for 50 years and hoping that by some curious means it will win through elections a majority. It cannot, because if it is in that position, it can only respond to adjusting itself to the reality. This is why I also am not a Democrat in the sense that I don't think that the electoral system is something else than a conservative system by nature, in the sense that the normal human being trying to adjust to whatever conditions is made to him or her, and societies also, and not imagine the necessity of moving away from those creating the conditions to move away. These moments are exceptional. Call it revolutions or something else. Whatever are their results, that is that they cannot solve the problems, all the problems. They can be just a revolutionary advance on the long road to global socialism. Now, to go fast now to the second part, but I want, I started at what time? At 9:20. So, or at 9:25 or 30. Что делать? What I will address here two sets of questions. I could address more than that. But two sets of questions. One is what looked to me, right or wrong, as what is the most probable in the visible future, and not short future of next month, but visible future. And second, more particularly, what could happen, or what, not what could happen, что делать in Europe, because you are Europeans and you are in the middle of that question. Now, first, what seems to me to, I would even say, I'm almost convinced that this will happen to various degrees and in various forms, and I'm convinced that this will not solve all the problems of humankind, for sure, but would create conditions for moving ahead. will be that the patterns of domination of imperialism, which cannot be dissociated from capitalism. I said imperialism, well, I'll come to that. Imperialism is not the latest stage of capitalism, it's the permanent stage of capitalism, of really existing historical capitalism, from the conquests and destruction of the Americas, mercantilism, and then colonization, and then a variety of forms, successive forms. Now, the victory I'm saying, not the defeat, the victories of the popular classes and of the nations, peoples, of the popular classes, including in the West, and of the peoples, basically from the peripheries, against really existing capitalism and imperialism, but within the logic, to a large extent, of that global system, have achieved enormous things through their victories. If the world is different today, and not necessarily worse than it was 100 years ago or 50 years ago, it's thanks to this first wave. Now, it compelled capitalism and imperialism to adjust for, say, the second half of the 20th century. It was imperialism, that capitalism and imperialism, that was compelled to adjust in the West to social democracy, to victories of the working classes having conquered a legitimacy that they had never had before in the history of real existing capitalism, and compelling to a kind of historical compromise, which was the welfare state, with enormous and positive change for a good number of working class people, but also the gigantic changes which occurred in the peripheries, from the Russian Soviet Union to China to Africa and Latin America, with a variety of degrees of radicalization, of radicality, which compelled imperialists to adjust. Imperialists has adjusted. We'll come to that general question. Capitalism is here forever or for a long time, because it is a system which has proved that it is able to adjust and to adjust and therefore to open new avenues for its own development. Was compelled to adjust to the industrialization, modernization was that I don't like modernization, but which was translate the reality of peoples of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And through this moving to various degrees with social dimensions, not socialist, but social dimensions, that is social rights to the working class people and to peasants also, etc., with a variety of degrees of radicalization and achievement. These achievements have been the major change, and positive one. But we have to look, because we are entering into a new phase of deepening of that crisis, what could be the lessons from those experiences, those, I would say, positive experiences, of their coming out of steam and then being eroded and then moving also along roads of derivations, including criminal ones in some cases, or in many cases, and finally breakdown of their capacity, with all the negative results that it has creating the possibility of the offensive of the second belle epoque of global capitalism. Now, these one can analyze the the internal contradictions of those systems, and I don't want to make sweeping generalities because of the variety, but still some sweeping generality because it was common, was the question of democratization. That is inaugurating and developing. I don't know what is democracy. I'm saying electoral democracy for me is not democracy, and bourgeois democracy is not democracy. Not the blah blah of the Soviet, that it is formal and so on, because it is better to live in a country where you are not necessarily tortured for your ideas than in a country where you are. But that's not the point. The point is that this democracy is, as I have said, dissociated from social progress, and even for the majority of people, at least the peripheries, associated with social regression continuously, and therefore not requested, not demanded, and have no legitimacy. Instead, the process of democratization, which is a very complex one, and which means moving from, I think things cannot start but from above to a certain extent. From down, movements, protests, etc., leading eventually to revolution, big movements, but simultaneously capturing not a meaningless power, but capturing some power, start using this power to change the things. That cannot develop, cannot move from one stage to another without a continuous process of deepening of democratization. In the perspective, after all, of communism. That is in the perspective of a real socialization of the management of society through the democratization process, and not basically through the market, the commodification, and therefore alienation of labor, and therefore etc., all that we have. Now, whether that was the product of limits of historical Marxism, it was the combined product not only of mistakes that some would have avoided. I think there's no big difference between the Trotskyites and the Stalinists, for instance, in their understanding of that major challenge. Not mistakes or limits of the thinking, but objective social forces as they were and as they have been produced by the very development of capitalism and polarization, and in all their concrete variety, the association of the two. Will the radical left of the future be able to go ahead, to go beyond that, and to inaugurate or to go, and very modest, I don't think that they will necessarily bring the final answer to all questions, etc., but move really ahead qualitatively. That is, integrate the process of that democratization. This is demanded. I mean, the new generation, what the new is right in their critique of the older generation. Not that the older generation was less clever than they are. Generations are of equal stupidity and cleverness, but just because they have understood by experience of their elders and by their own experience that the patterns of organization, of action, with all their internalization of hierarchy and so on, which corresponded probably to the objective possibility at an earlier stage, is now dépassé, and better can be produced. Whether they will or will not produce the better, I don't know. But in that frame,